And then I'd like to have you. Yep. Can I do that? No? Oh no, it's bad like that. Okay. You are really small on my screen now. Well, it's and now the chat is here on this screen. Come here, you. Hop. Okay. Well, I think it's okay like that. Can you see? Yes. And I had written another term which was the gravity term, and I wrote it like that. And well, I had two remarks. I mean, the main remarks was this was always positive. And the idea was, well, if I put something up, I put also something down, and I should have something null in average. Do I understand correctly your question, Julien?
Yeah, that was my point.
Okay.
First.
So, well, I have two answers to this question. So I had a first answer which was more or less a kind of not a real answer. It was kind of a mathematical trick, which was say, well, okay, if I don't calculate the fluctuation of the position regarding to the average position of the surface, I could have calculated something really close to that, and I could have said, well, I will define H as this quantity. Well, if I define H as this quantity, well, this term will be unchanged. And this term will be unchanged. And the only thing that we'll have is, well, at the end, we'll have an average of H which will be different to 0, and we will say, okay, we don't take care of the mode of infinite wavelengths, and since what we want to calculate are simply the fluctuation, it will be okay. So it was kind of a trick, and well, I discussed that with a colleague, and she said me, well, that's a trick. It's not a real physical answer. that I agree with, and I think that a more physical answer will be to say, well, and tell me if you agree with that. The idea is that, well, a liquid is incompressible, and in any case, if I have, does the camera work? I mean, it's not important, but well, we'll see. The other answer to this question was the other answer to this question by Julien was to say, well, if I have a bath with a liquid and I want to push a balloon inside of it, what I will have is that I will have to exert a work in order to push the liquid. So if I want to push something down in one area, to some point it will have to go up in the other area. So in average, I clearly understand that the work related to the gravity shouldn't be equal to 0. It always costs you some energy. Is that clear?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So I think that answer 2 is better than the answer 1. And well, I also would like to come back to the end of my calculation, because at the end of my calculation, I was not that clear. At the end of my calculation, what we had is mainly we say that the average square of the position of the surface was related to kT over gamma, and I was summing this term, I take my note, k dk over k square plus kappa square. And well, I had to choose two limits. And of course, I had said that I will take 2 pi over a for the maximum wavelength possible. And here I have said that I will go to 0. But instead of that, I think that it will be better not to go from 0, but to go from 2 pi divided by L, where L is the size of the box. Well, of course, if the size of the box is big, this tends to 0, but it could be a little bit different from 0. And if I do the calculation, well, it's exactly the same calculation as before, and I go to kt over 4 pi gamma times the logarithm of 1 plus kp square kappa minus 2 divided by a square divided by 1/4 kappa. So I will try to fix these, sorry, because you don't move. I stop my camera for 1 second. Really, I have a technical issue. Okay, no, I think that you can move. Okay, I fixed it. So it is more or less, well, it is more or less what we had last time, but the only difference is that last time I assumed that L was equal to infinity. Okay, last time I assumed this. And of course, now it allows me to say, well, there are some limits, which is if the size of the container is large compared to the capillary length, then the H fluctuation are the one we calculate last time, which is kt over 4 pi gamma times the logarithm of 1 plus 4 pi square kappa minus 2 divided by a square. Okay, it's what we had last time, but we also discussed a situation where, well, we can have a capillary length which tends to infinity, just because, I don't know, the gravity tends to 0, or the difference of density tends to 0. And in this situation, what we have is that the fluctuation becomes a little bit different, and they becomes 4 pi over gamma times 4 pi gamma. And then the fluctuation becomes independent of the capillary length. But what is surprising now is that they strongly depend on the size of the container. Okay, so last time I had these, and I just wanted to show you that, well, if we go to these limits, I had it in a bad way last time. Okay. Well, if you agree with that, what I'd like to discuss today a little bit more is some other kind of fluctuations which are relevant for biology, which are the fluctuation of membranes. Well, as you know, let's begin with an introduction. As you know, or as you may know, membranes, they are created by oops, they are usually bilayers of well, lipids which are not soluble, so it's not soap. So these membranes, we already discussed the fact that they are usually negatively charged. That's the reason why we avoid cationic surfactants. And well, these membranes, they can also fluctuate. And well, it can be interesting to calculate the spectrum of the fluctuation, or again, the amplitude of the fluctuation. So, of course, this kind of membrane, you will have, of course, a fluctuation, kind of capillary fluctuation, like before. So I will don't calculate it again. But you can also think in terms of other modes, and the other mode that we can have is that, well, you can have a stretching of the membrane, and as an example, you can define kind of a modulus which will be related to the increase of area of the surface. So if A is the area of the surface, A not the area of the surface when it is undeformed, well, we could write something like that, which will be related to the stretching of the molecule. Well, usually the stretching energy is so high that we can neglect that. So we neglect it because the elastic modulus of a membrane is large. But what exists with a membrane is that they have a bending energy. And the bending energy is the fact, well, that it's not like a surface. Here, if you want to bend this, it will cost you some energy. But if you want to write the bending energy, well, usually what you will have to write is you will have to write over the surface of the membrane. You will have two terms. Well, one term which is related to the mean curvature, and one term which is related to the Gaussian curvature. Well, here I should write to be clearer. So this is the Gaussian curvature. and this is the mean curvature. And are you all familiar with these ideas of mean curvature and Gaussian curvature, or do you need me to explain it a little bit more?
I don't know what is the mean curvature, but
Okay.
I can guess what is it.
Okay, let's come back on that. Toc, toc, toc. Alors. Well, usually what usually you know the mean curvature. The idea is that, well, if you have a surface like that, and you want to calculate the curvature in the point M, what you will have to calculate that is that, well, you will take the normal N to the surface, and with this normal N, what you will be able to do is you will be able to construct two planes, and then it becomes really hard for me to make a drawing. So the plane in blue will cut the surface within the blue line, and you can also cut with a perpendicular plane, which also, this is nasty, contain the normal vector. And, well, with these two lines, you will be able to define two. So that's curves in classical. So you will be able to define the R1 radius and the R2 radius. Even if my drawing is really bad, is that almost clear? So the point is that when you choose the two planes, the R1 and R2 depends on the choice of the two planes, but you can show that the mean, the curvature, which is 1 over R1 plus 1 over R2, is a constant independent of the choice of the plane.
Okay, I didn't realize that was the same curvature than in the Laplace formula.
Okay. Yes, exactly. And this one is the one that occurs in the Laplace formula. But you can also define the other one, which is 1 over the Gaussian curvature, the Gaussian curvature, which is 1 over the square root of R1, R2. And this is also a constant independent of the plane. So on any surface, you can define these two metrics, and these two metrics are important. And indeed, it's usually if you deal with membranes, you have to take this into account. Well, the point is that for the membranes, usually we can neglect. I mean, for what I want to discuss today, I will neglect this term. And if I do that, if I neglect this term, what I will be able to write is that the free energy of this surface regarding to the bending will be something like dr times b divided by 2r square, where square is a radius. So if I come back to what is the radius of curvature, this will be something like, which is dr times 1 over 2, and the radius is simply the Laplacian of the surface And since it comes to the power 2, it will be something like that. Okay, this is in 3D, the generalization that the curvature is something related to the second derivative of a position. So if we do that, and if we do exactly the same calculations than we have done before, what we will have is that if we go to Fourier series, so we decompose we calculate the Fourier modes as before of the surface. Now, since we have this here, the free energy delta F will scale like 1 over 2A times the sum of B. So you recognize the B that I just forgot here. And here, since you have this term, we have a K to the power 4 term. And I say that it was a Fourier series. Okay with that? And here, thanks to the equipartition theorem, we can say that, well, for each mode, KT over 2 is equal to 1 over 2A BK4, the average value of this term. Sorry with that. And then we are able to say that the amplitude of each mode in average regarding to that is A KT divided by K4. And basically, it's exactly the same calculation than the one we have done before. So from that, again, we can calculate the average of these. And the average of these, I just plot the result is 1 over A divided by 2 pi K KDK divided by 2 pi to the power 2 times, yes, that's the integral term. And I have again the A KT divided by BK4 term. So this simplify, 2 pi simplify, and well, at the end, it's really egal here. We have, I just write the math. I don't want to spend too much time. It's 4 KT divided by 4 pi B, which are still here. And I have a 1 over K3 that I integrate, which gives me 1 over K2. And that I have to integrate between two limits. And of course, well, I can go to 2 pi over A. That here, I mean, I can take to infinity or I can keep it, but it will be the maximum mode. And here, the minimum mode will be 2 pi over L, with L is the size, again, of the membrane. And well, if I do that, at the end, what is interesting is that the fluctuation amplitude will be kT divided by 16p square b times L square. So this is, I mean, this is really interesting because contrary to what we had for the thermal fluctuation, well, here, the fluctuation, they strongly depends on the size of the membrane. Of course, if B is increasing, the fluctuation is decreasing. That we understand perfectly. And of course, we have this KT term, which shows that we are dealing with soft matter. I mean, these are thermal fluctuations. And well, here you show that we do not care the other terms, which will be, it will be a minus a square. So that's the reason why we can take these, because it's really not important mathematically. So here we are able to measure the fluctuation of a membrane, and the reason why I'm doing this calculation is that, well, this is used to measure the bending rigidity. In the real world. So I can show you the way people are doing that. If I can switch to the next slide. But really, I mean, it's one paper. I mean, I've chosen one paper among several ones. I mean, it's a paper of 2020. That's the reason why I've chosen this one. That's kind of a recent one. And what they are studying is that they are studying a real the real fluctuation of a membrane. Here you see a membrane. So you can, so here it's in a phase contrast microscopy. So and here that's in confocal microscopy. Do you have an idea of this? Do you know about these techniques a little bit? No? Well, confocal microscopy, that's a technique which use fluorescence molecule. And the idea is, well, is to how to make a nice, well, the idea is that you shine light to your sample. So you take a laser and you shine light to your sample. And here you will have some fluorescence. And the idea is to be able to precisely locate the position of these points in order to make pictures with a resolution which is better than the one you have usually in optics. And the idea is that, well, if you go, sorry for that, if you conjugate the points that you have shine light to a pinhole, you will be able to select exactly the position where the light has been sent. And the idea is that, and here, the idea is that using that, you reach a precision of the position that is better than the relay area, the relay diameter. And the phase contrast microscopy is a microscopy where you use optical filtration techniques. That's really two techniques that are really useful in biophysics in order to, Rachel, you seem lost. No, that's okay. Okay. That's a technique that allows to go to see objects that are not different, because the point is that, well, a membrane that's mainly water in water, and if you put that under a classical microscope, you won't see anything because there is not that much real contrast between the inside of the vesicle and the outside of the vesicle. So based on that, you see that people are really able to measure the fluctuation of the membranes. And the idea is that usually the bending rigidity that they measure is that they measure for membranes B is of the order of typically 20 kT for biological vesicles. And I mean, that's not something that easy to be able to measure in situ the bending rigidity of a membrane. And this bending rigidity, that's really important to measure it, because, well, if I want to go to red blood cells as an example, their bending rigidity will change if there are some disease. So the bending rigidity is a signature of some diseases. And for people interested in microfluidics, well, that's really a good way of putting this vesicle in microfluidics channels in order to be able to sort or to measure all the modulus of this system.
And what can explain the difference of tendency between the theory and the experiment for larger size?
Here, I think that this is due to, I mean, at large Q, which means which is small length scales, I think it's due to the optical resolutions of the techniques, which are not exactly the same. So I think the problem is optical resolution.
Okay.
Something that we should have in mind also is that, well, here we have to stay in the regime where the bending term, which is AKT divided by BK4, is larger than the other term, which is AKT divided by gamma K square. Okay, so here we have the bending modes. And here you have the capillary modes. And if you go to Q, which are not the right ones, you will be able to measure rather the surface tension than the bending rigidity. Okay, so be careful of that. Okay.
Sorry, I have one question.
Yes, Anna.
So this bending rigidity scale that you wrote, it's defined for some kind of parameters like temperature and concentration of the outer solution, right? Because I just guess that it very depends on the cell type and some conditions.
Well, yes, you're right. You're right that B depends on the membrane types. And now my blackboard becomes nasty. I mean, that's a mess. It slightly depends on the temperature. I mean, and you're right. When I say here that it's 20 kT, it is that the range of B is of 20 kT, but it doesn't depend that much of the temperature because it's the bending rigidity is mainly a steric effect. You see, I mean, it depends on the size of the molecule and their compaction. If they are big enough, I mean, then it will be really hard to bend the membrane. If they are really small, then the bending it will be small. And the KT here, it just give us an order of magnitude, but it doesn't tell that B increases like T.
Okay, thank you.
Because if you're right, it's a good point. If I say that here is 20 kT, then I say kT, and there is no more any dependency on the temperature of the fluctuation spectrum, and that doesn't make any sense. So it's 20 kT in order of magnitude. Okay, that's a very, very good point. Okay, so it's more or less what I wanted to discuss to you about the fluctuation of membranes and the fluctuation of molecules. I will go a little step further, and I would like to discuss today some forces, because up to now we have mainly discussed shapes, concentration, and we didn't say that much about forces. So it is the chapter 4 or the lecture 4, and it is entropic forces. And of course, we won't be able to do that within one lecture. We'll have to do that with 1.5 lectures. So we will not finish today because we have a lot of forces that are important. And well, soft matter is at the bridge between stat phys and mechanics. So it's always important to go this back and forth point. And what I first would like to discuss a little bit with you again, and that's a way of coming back things which have already been discussed in this lecture, is the polymer elasticity. And well, just do a quick reminder. About what we have told so far. Well, so far what we have told is that the polymer is mainly a random walk and that the average size of a polymer should be related to the number of monomers times the size of the monomer. Okay, that's what we had said so far. And we have discussed the fact that in some cases, due to the rigidity between the two monomers, we have to renormalize these length scales. But in any way, it is what we said. What you have discussed in tutorials is another way of seeing these problems, is the fact that since we can say that in average the shape of a polymer is due to the fact that we have a sum of many random vectors. You can also say that the probability of finding the end of the chains as a position R with a precision delta R will be something like that. And tell me if I'm wrong, you have seen that. Sorry. And these is simply the theorem of the central limit. Okay? Do you agree? Have you seen that in the tutorials? So, and from that, it is just math. You can go to the elasticity of a single chain. And if you do that, what you will say is that, I think that you have also seen that the probability of having the end of the chain at a position R, which is a macrostate, will be the number of configurations that give this end-to-end vector position divided by the total number of configuration of the chain. And if you do that, you will say that, well, the entropy of a polymer chain will be related to the logarithm of configuration that gives these macrostates. So this is which gives this macrostate. And then it is simply a constant minus, well, 3k R square divided by 2 Na2. So these you have probably already seen. And the idea is that, well, the free energy for a polymer chain is U minus Ts. And if you say that there is no interaction between the monomer, Well, then the free energy of a chain will be depending on the macro state, and it will be a constant, let's say F0, plus 3kt r squared divided by 2na squared. This you know perfectly, but I wanted to write it back. And here, since you say that f is proportional to the length to the power 2, you have a spring, and to know the stiffness of the spring, you will say that the stiffness of the spring is simply 3kt r square, 3kt divided by na square. And here you recover what is called the entropic spring. And it's entropic because K, the stiffness, is proportional to KT. And you see also that K decreases when with N increases. So if you have a longer molecular chain, then the stiffness decreases. So long polymers are soft. And here you are probably complaining because you have seen that several times already in your life. Okay with that? And so I don't know if you have seen if you have done the experiment. How can you evidence that? The entropic elasticity of a chain. Have you already made the experiment? Have you seen the experiment?
Not for my part, but I guess something like putting an elastic in a bath and modifying the temperature while measuring the length of the elastic or something like this.
Yeah, so I think that I can show you something. Can you see? Can you see? Yes. So it's here. It's just to show you that the effect is not that strong. So here you see the setup. So that's a mass, and here you have a rubber, and here connected to this mass you have a ruler in order to see the horizontal the horizontal position of this mass, and the guy will hit the rubber. And you will see that it's not a very huge effect. It's something that you can measure, but it's not strong. Okay, so you have seen it's a low effect, and the reason why it's a low effect is so now I have to do something like this. Okay, and back this. Yeah, and the reason why it's a small effect is basically that, well, since the elasticity is proportional to kT, well, you change the temperature of the rubber of, let's say, delta T is something like maybe 10 degrees C over T, which is already 293 Kelvin. So, I mean, delta T over T is always small compared to one in this kind of experiments, which clearly shows that the elastocalorific effect, as Ludovic called it, is a small effect. Well, I have a question for you. I mean, what we have made is the calculation for one chain. But in the rubber experiment, we are doing the experiment with a whole rubber. So do you have any idea of how we could go from kappa, the entropic string, to what will be a shear modulus or a Young modulus in a sample? Well, to do that, what we'll have to do is we will have to make some extra effort, and we'll have to make some strong assumption. And the assumption that we will do usually is the assumption that the deformation on the chain is affine. So the idea is how to go from one chain to the whole rubber. And the idea to do so is to say, well, if I take a sample like that with size Lx naught, Ly naught, and Lz naught, and I stretch it, it will be lambda x Lx naught, lambda y Ly naught, and lambda z Lz naught. The idea is that we have to make the hypothesis that the deformations that are applied at the scale of the sample are the same than the one that are applied at the scale of the chain. So that's a strong hypothesis, because it's not completely obvious that things like that will be done in a real sample. So if we do so, then the change in entropy of one chain during this deformation will be related to this quantity. So it will be a minus 3k divided by 2 n square r square at the end, plus 3k divided by 2 n a square times the initial the initial size of the chain. And these, we can relate it to the deformation if the deformation is affine. So the change in entropy in one chain will be something like minus 3k divided by 2n squared. And then we'll have to and sorry, here we have to take into account all the deformation of all the chains. So it will be Lx squared minus 1 Rx naught 0 plus Lx squared minus 1 plus Lx squared, sorry, it's not x, it's y. Minus 1 Rz 0. And it's a change of conformation of one chain. So if we go from one chain to the entire network of chains, the change in entropy of the system will be of this shape. So it will be, well, minus 3k. So I switch directly to the results probably. Minus. So what you see is that these and these, for one chain, if the chain is entropic, what is that?
NaX0 square or something like this.
It is Na square divided by, each term is Na square divided by 3. Okay? So for the whole network, the average change in entropy, if we go directly to the results, it will be minus nk divided by 2 times Lx square plus Ly square plus Lz square minus 3. Sorry for this Na square divided by 3. For the entire network, it is what we have. And here, n is the number of strands and if we do that, the change in free energy of the network is minus T delta S of the network, and it is plus NKT divided by 2 times Lx square plus Ly square plus Lz square minus 3. Okay. For this one, we will let it automatic because if not, I will be in trouble. Okay with that? So now what is interesting is if we go from that, we can go from an uniaxial deformation, which is what we have done in the experiment, in the movie. So the idea is that, well, we stretch the sample is in this direction. So we have Lx, which is equal to lambda. If we do that, if we assume that the rubber is incompressible, what can we say about Ly and Lz? So what are Ly and Lz? Yes, you're right. So if the rubber is incompressible, what we should have is Lx, Ly, Lz is equal to 0. So we should have Ly is simply 1 over the square root of lambda, and Lz is 1 over the square root of lambda also. Due to this. So if we write that, the delta F of the network is nkt divided by 2 times lambda square plus 2 divided by lambda minus 3. And if we do that, and now I try to be smarter than before. If we do that, we can calculate the stress during a deformation, which is the force divided by the size of the sample. So it is 1 over Ly Lz times the derivative of the free energy of the network regarding to Lx. So it is 1 over Ly Lz divided by 1 over Lx initial df network, divided by d lambda. Sorry, that's the stress. And this is lambda divided by Lx naught, Ly naught, Lz naught. So the stress here in the sample is simply 1 over V times lambda times df network divided by d lambda. And if you make the calculation, it is, because it's not on the same page, it is nkt divided by V times lambda square minus 1 over lambda. Okay, and that's here, that is the true stress in the sample. So here you see something which is really interesting is that, well, the stress, it's not a lambda square, it's a lambda here. And no, it's a lambda square, sorry. You see that even though we assume that everything was okay, there is no more a linear relationship between the stress and the deformation. I mean, the stress is not proportional to lambda; it's proportional to lambda square. And what we see is that something that we'll have for the polymer is that the shear modulus will be proportional to N divided by V KT, which is the density of the materials times KT. So here we see how it was possible to go from one chain to the whole sample, and we recover at the end that G is proportional to KT. But what we have lost here in this description is that the influence of the length of the chain is not that trivial to see. So we have to go to smarter model in order to see that. But at least we have a way to go from the situation where when we have one single chain to many chains. And I think that up to now, what you have done usually in your lecture is that, well, you say, okay, I have the elasticity of one chain, and you never write how you go from one chain to several ones. And to check that, yes, here you see that that's a curve that I've taken in the book by Kolbe and Rubinstein. I should write it. On the polymer physics. And you see that they clearly recover the nonlinear dependency of sigma with respect to the stress. And here I should note that what they called sigma engineering is different to what I've called sigma xis, which is the real stress. Sigma engineering is fx divided by lx naught, that's not ly naught, lz naught. Because it's difficult to measure in situ. And then, yeah, this, if you come back to what we have calculated, it's slightly different. It is nkt over v, which has a term which is proportional to lambda, but has still a term which is not proportional to lambda. Okay, so clearly the conclusion is that the affine model usually works. Do you have an idea of systems where we could go, where this affine description should be wrong? Or where the polymer should not follow this kind of curves? For those of you who are engineers, maybe. Well, if not, usually rubbers are charged, are filled. With solid particles. Like tires. That's polymer plus carbon black. Ça m'énerve. Sorry. And that's the reason why the rubbers, the tires are black. And well, the idea is that if you take a rubber which is filled with solid particles, like these, you see that if I make a deformation of the sample, if I have the solid particles inside, so here, I will have a rubber, and here I will have a solid particle. So you see that the deformation seen by the rubber in between the solid particles is not the deformation of the whole sample. And with this kind of situation, which is a situation which is often the case, and the rubber that is used in the experiment that you will show is probably something like that. So here, with this kind of system, the affine model will not be the good one, because the deformation filled by the polymer is not the right one. But well, there are a lot of situations where it will work. Okay, so now we have dealt with what happens with the elasticity of a single chain. So we have dealt with with how to go from one chain to several chains using an affine model that is often used but not always true. And what I want to do in the last part of the lecture of this lecture for today at least, is to discuss the case of osmosis forces and osmosis, which is a case also where entropy will be important. So let's go to the second part.
Sorry, can I just ask one thing?
Sure.
So, in the 2 pages ago.
2 pages ago, which is something like that?
Yes, when you said that the influence of number of monomers is lost.
Yes.
Like, could you just please clarify if it's like only in the circumstances of applying stress on the polymer, or I don't understand, or just in this model?
I just say that here you see the only thing that I have is the here what I have, or let's say here also. Here what I have, it's a density of strength. I mean, it is just that I don't see the number of monomers per chains anymore. You see, it's not obvious that the number of monomers per chains is included in the system, in this equation. You see what I mean?
Yes. Okay, I just thought that it has like some interpretation in like physical meaning.
No. Sorry, I was just saying that, well, here when I deal with one chain, I clearly say that kappa is proportional to 1/n. So I see the influence of the number of chains. But if I go here, I have only the density of strength. So the number of monomers per chain is hidden somewhere, but it's not completely apparent in this equation.
Yes. Okay. I see. Thank you.
You're welcome. So what I want to do with osmosis is, well, I want to discuss osmosis, which is another system where you will see KT is important. And if you agree, we make a 2-minute break. Okay. So let's discuss about osmosis a little bit. So what is osmosis? What do you know about osmosis?
There is this molecular pressure called osmotic pressure. It's a link with osmosis.
Yeah. So the idea is that
it's linked to gradient of chemical potential in a medium.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So the idea is we have a semi-permeable membrane. So this membrane, we say that, okay, it lets go the solvent can go through. So if let's do some nice drawing. So if we say that the solvent is black, so we have on each side some solvents that can go through, and we have some solutes that cannot cross the membrane. So they can only rebound on the barrier. So if you have a difference in concentration in molecule on each side, you will have, let's say, a diffusive flux. Let's say if C1, the concentration of solute on the side 1 is larger than the concentration in 2. So if the concentration is higher here, you will have a diffusion flux like that. And if you want to stay at equilibrium, you will have to say that the pressure, is different in between size 1 and size 2. So how will you rely the difference of pressure and the difference of concentration? So delta pi, here it's, let's say, P2 minus P1, and delta C is C2 . Yeah, Gosset, here, here I will not discuss about charged particles. They can be charged, but I don't take care of that. That's particles that can go through or not. So what is the relationships between these two quantities? So I would say that method 1 will be to say, well, yes, Rachel, you're right. Delta P is RT delta phi. So with this, I have to take care of that here. You have that in, this will be in mole per meter square, if you write. Well, yeah, Adrien, equilibrium of the chemical potential. Yes, it will be method 2. The method 1 is simply you say, well, you have a ideal gas on each side. So that's an ideal gas of solute. So each exerts a pressure P1 RT C1 and P2 equal R2 C2. And based on that, there is a difference of pressure delta P, which is RT delta C. So here it's a very naive a description of what is osmosis, but it is really what it is. It is exactly what it is. It is the fact that you have a solute which exerts as an ideal gas, and the particles rebound on the surface. They exert the pressure, and this difference of pressure is what is due to the difference of concentration. So the method 2 is the one proposed by Adrien. It's to say, well, we'll write the equality of the chemical potential, and we'll say that, well, the chemical potential of the solvent in the compartment 1 is equal to the chemical potential of the solvent in the space 2, and you write the chemical potential for the solvent because only the solvent is an equilibrium. And then you say, well, the concentration of the solvent is, so here you have to write the concentration of the solvent in the space 1 at a pressure P1 is equal to the concentration of the solvent in the space 2 and we can, instead of writing in terms of solvent for the concentration, we can say that it will be the concentration, the chemical potential of the solvent for the concentration of solute C1 at a pressure P1 is equal to the concentration of the solvent at a pressure, at a concentration C2 in the compartment 2. Okay, and here we can say that the chemical potential in space 1 as a concentration C1 is the concentration of reference plus Kt, the logarithm of C1, and the concentration at the concentration C2 is a chemical potential which is the same and here we make an assumption, which is that the solutions are ideal. And if I do something like that, it's exactly the same assumption, and sorry, it becomes nasty, that the one we do for ideal gas. Do you agree with that?
I have a question.
Yes.
It's when you wrote mu of the solvent as a function of the concentration of the solvent. Why is it the concentration of the solvent, then the concentration of the solute?
Yeah, I mean, as you see, just at the line below, I said, well, okay, I write the chemical potential for the concentration of the solvent, but I can also write it with the concentration of the solute, which is 1 minus the concentration of the solvent. So I mean, it's almost the same. But here you're right. I could have directly written that.
Okay. It's because we have an expression for the solute and not for the solvent.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You're right. Well, the point is that here, sorry, it's really bad. But here, the pressure are not the same in the compartment 1 and in the compartment 2. So here, I have to take, I should have written it differently because now it's in the corner of my page, but I have a dependency of pressure here. So if I put, I have to use the fact that I know the derivative of the chemical potential with respect to the pressure. And what is it? It is the volume. And if I assume that the liquid or the solvent is incompressible, I can combine these two equations and say that, well, I will have that the Vm divided by multiplies by the difference of pressure that comes from the difference, this expression is simply I try to here is simply Kt times the logarithm of this C2 . And if I linearize these, I will come back directly to the expression delta P is equal to Kt let's say, yes, C2 minus C1, and here the concentration are in molecule per meter square, which is the one we had before. Okay, so the basic idea is that, I mean, I will rewrite it for you a little bit more clear because here it was a little bit nasty in my notes with my blackboard, but I will write it better for you. But the idea is that this can be recovered by simply by writing the equality of the chemical potential. Okay. Well, what I wanted to do, I mean, it was a proposition by Lideric Bocquet, who has done this course before. Here, it's kind of the chemist approach. And can we have a physicist approach of osmosis? And the idea proposed by the colleague is to say, well, basically, if we do something like that, we can call that this asks X. And well, we can say that for the solute, the membrane is a potential. So we can say that we have a potential for the solvent U of X, and we can say that U of X tends to infinity when X tends to 0, which makes that the solute cannot cross the barrier. And if we do that, let's say the concentration of the solute as a position will be the concentration of the solute at infinity times minus Qx divided by Kt. And well, this is a concentration far from the barrier. When if we do that, we can say that the force exerted by the membrane on the solute is the sum of each solute particle of the derivative of the energy of the particle with respect to the position. Okay, this is a very mechanical assumption of the force. We have particle, we have membrane, and we can calculate. So if we do that, the force exerted, if we replace the sum by an integral, the force exerted on for the species 1 as an example, it will be the sum over the whole volume, so dx, dy, dz of rho e exponential of minus u of x divided by kt. So that's the number of particles, the volume, times the force exerted. So minus du divided by dx. But this is A, the area of the membrane, times something that we can calculate, because here we have the derivative of u regarding to x, and here is the exponential. So this is simply rho y kt divided by exponential of minus u of x divided by kt that we integrate from 0 to infinity. But here in 0, we know what it is. Since u tends to infinity when x tends to 0, this is simply minus a rho y kt. So then, if we want to calculate the difference of pressure, which is the difference of force exerted of each size, it will be F2 minus F1 divided by A, and it will be rho, it will be KT divided by rho square divided by rho 1. And here, I have forgot something. I calculate the force exerted by the membrane on the solute. So I should calculate the inverse of that, the opposite of that, to get this. Sorry for that. So here you see, it's another way. I mean, it's more or less another way to see that to see the osmosis as the force exerted by an ideal gas. We recover the idea of the ideal gas. So what we could discuss in the last minutes is we could discuss a little bit the order of magnitudes. We say that delta P is of the order of delta C RT. So here we have something like 8. Here we have something like 3 to the power 2. Well, if we take delta C is equal to 2 moles per liters, it will be 2 10 to the power 3 mole per meter square. So it will be 2 times 3 times 8. This is huge. So osmosis, which is something which is clearly related to KT, again, it gives really strong pressure. So what are the applications of osmosis? Since it gives huge pressure. Yeah, for plants to drink, yes. The idea is that you have, if you want to go to look at the way the water goes up in a tree, you will have to take several mechanisms, which are one of them is the Jurin's law, which is the capillary ascension. But there is also some evaporation here on the which will concentrate here and which will make a flux due to osmosis. At home, yeah, to make salty water drinkable, so it's desalination. So that is where osmosis make a problem, because here you have salted water and here you have the semi-permeable membrane. Here you expect to have pure water. So if you want to push the water through the semi-permeable membrane, you will have to apply delta P, which is huge. That is how it works. So Adrien, you say blue energy. That's kind of the actual dream of getting blue energy. And the blue energy, for those of you are not aware, is the idea that, well, if you have somewhere salted water, and here you have, let's say, pure water in one container like that. The water will go through here, and the level of the water will increase here, as an example, and the water will fall down. And if you put a turbine here, you won't, because you got energy simply by having pure water and salted water, and that's you can have in the real life. Salted water, you have that on the sea or in the ocean, and that you have a river. And that's renewable. I mean, you have all that is renewable. And what is the problem with that? Why don't we have this kind of stuff everywhere? Because you don't need anything except well, that's what. So Lila, so I try to answer to the question in the chat. So too many questions. So the question of Lila is, what do we do with the water afterwards? We put that in the ocean. That's always what we do with water. I mean, here that's clean water. We can put that in the water. The other question is, how can fish be fine in ocean? Yeah, I mean, it's I think the skin. I mean, the skin of is not that permeable to water. To answer to Ludovic, and I think that because it's a reason. I mean, and that's really the question of osmosis on skin and on human tissues is really important. It's the reason why we cannot drink salted water, because it will kill us, and it's the reason why if you are on a boat alone on the oceans, you will have to find some fish and kill the fish and eat the fish to get some unsalted water. And yes, the problem is here technologically. The problem is here. So the point is not only that the membranes are hard to produce, is that the permeability is really low. Because what you want is you want to have small channels in order to not to let the ions go through the membranes. So the permeability is low, then the flux are really low. And of course, you have a lot of energy, but you have a very low power. That's the problem. And one of the issues is how can we make some membranes with a good permeability. That's kind of the subjects of what people are trying to do right now, and there are some groups working at the École Normale or at Institut Pierre-Gilles de Gênes who are working on this kind of things. Well, and to finish, of course, because to make a circle about the fact that at the beginning we are saying that it's too early in the morning and we are too close to the breakfast. Marmalade is something which really use osmosis. And the way marmalade is using osmosis is the fact that when you have marmalade, what you have is mainly that you have something with a lot of sugar. And if you put a bacteria on the top, since the membrane of the bacteria is permeable to water, what you will have is that the water will go through outside, because there is a difference of osmotic pressure between the bacteria and the marmalade, and the bacteria will die due to osmosis. So that's a good point to stop, because I shouldn't be longer than that. So okay, so today we have made two things. So we have discussed, well, we finished the fluctuation. We discussed how to deal with polymers and force, and at the scales of a rubber, and not only at the scale of a chain. And we discussed a little bit osmosis, which is an important tool in many situations, because a lot of things that can be seen as osmosis. And for the next lecture, we'll go on with forces, and we will discuss two types of force mainly. We will discuss depletion forces, which are also Yes, that's the reason why honey can last for thousands of years. Next week, we will discuss fluctuations of membranes and the fact that they can create forces. We will discuss the fact that charged surfaces can create some forces, and we will discuss depletion forces, which is also something important in soft matter. And if we have some time, but by midot, we will begin the next chapter, which will be the case of continuous interface.